Hello. So this is a guide, or I guess a collection of my insights on how to improve in debating. First thing is that this is primarily for speakers and for coaches of speakers. And that's because I've spent most of my career speaking rather than judging. And a lot of my improvement in judging has been me translating my speaking skills into judging. So I think it might be better to learn from someone who has maybe fully pursued the judging track and learned primarily from doing some judging on that. The second thing here is I'm staggering this lecture in terms of the level of debating. So you might want to assess where you are in your debating career and skip to that point. So if it's going to be structured into novice, intermediate, and advanced, and my insights on how to improve at each level. So it might not be that worthwhile for you to check out the novice level if you're very far into debating, or for you to check the advanced level if you're just starting out. So just, uh, I guess, click through the video and see what might be most useful for you. So this is based on my personal theory of improvement, which I don't think is necessarily correct. Like, I personally believe it, right? But I think people might disagree. It's not important whether or not you fully agree with us. It's more important, I think, to take on some of the insights that I have and like weigh them in your own perspective on debating. But I think that people primarily improve at three things in debating. The first is their fundamentals. So stuff like how well can you structure an argument? How well can you speak the prime minister role? Things like that. Next is strategy. So how do you use the game of debating to your advantage and put yourself in a spot to win a debate? The next is knowledge. So just how well do you understand the world? What do you know? And there are many different things debates can be about. How much can you debate about all of them? I think all three of these things are obviously important, and that improving at them simultaneously is also important. But that said, I think there are different stages in your career in which each has a different level of importance. So I think at the start, your fundamentals are very important because you might have really great ideas, you might know a lot about a specific debate motion, but understanding how to structure it in a way that is, I guess, easily understood by people, or just one that follows the rules of debating, I think is key into like reaching the next step of debate. The next is the middle, where I think strategy starts to become a big differentiator. So here, I think people have like a fairly good base level understanding of the world. People know what a PM speech is, what a whip speech is, but it's a question of what are you doing in the round that'll put you in the best spot to win, regardless of like who your opponents might be. The last is I think knowledge becomes very key at the highest level of debating. And that isn't to say that strategy isn't important. I think fundamentals is probably not that important, admittedly. Everyone at this stage can do a PM, can do a whip or whatever. But I think strategy is incredibly important still at the highest level of debating. However, I think it is no longer a sense of strategy at this level. While your senses are probably good, a lot of it is about being able to justify your sense and strategy. So, for example, if you're going to take a specific strategy in a debate that's very, very good, you can't just do the strategy. You have to explain why that strategy works. You have to supply reasons as to why this is the best strategy and one that will win you the debate. And that comes from just knowing more about the motion, or at least will be largely differentiated by knowing more about the motion. And so I think at the highest level, the biggest point of improvement you could possibly have is just understanding the world better, especially for topics that you might not be very well familiar with. So, as a novice speaker, I think a lot of people struggle out the debate because you have only 15 minutes of debate. I think a lot of people expect when they watch speeches that these people had like the last week or a couple days to be able to research a topic, when really 15 minutes is very impressive to a lot of people. I think if you're starting out, that seems impossible, but honestly, there will just come a point where it's very natural and you won't realize it, but it will come, and it's hard to see at the start, but it will happen. The next is structuring your knowledge and thoughts into a speech. Because understanding both how do you play to the rules of debating, because there are particular expectations of, say, a prime minister speech, and at the same time, how do you organize your thoughts? How do you make sure that people can look at it and grade it as a debate speech? And lastly is just communicating your ideas. Sometimes you have very good thoughts, very smart arguments in your head, but when you say them, you're not really as convinced by them. And the reason for that isn't that the ideas were bad, but you just need to find ways in which you can strategically communicate these ideas to other people. I think then, at the start, your primary goal is to understand the game of debating and the rules that surround it. So, how does debating work what do you do in each speaker role, who goes when, and who speaks where, I think is really key in ensuring you reach the intermediate level of debating. And lastly, I think morale is super important at this stage. Mostly because you'll either be dealing with very young students who are still emotionally maturing, might have difficulty losing, might have difficulty being overwhelmed by all these different things, or you're dealing with people who are possibly just seeing if debate club is for them. So they have many different like interests they're picking between, and if they think debating isn't very fun, then they will just pick something else. And if they might have ended up enjoying debating at some point in the future, but it was difficult for them initially, you want to make sure it's as easy for them as possible. Um, and given that, I think as a coach or even as a speaker, there are many things you can do that will make you improve faster, but are probably also more likely to make you quit debating early on. And you want to be very careful in wanting to ensure people are improving, but balancing that with ensuring people are happy and enjoying and continue to stay motivated. So, some advice for novice improvement. I think the first thing is just the debate. And I think you have to assess what kind of speaker or student you might have. Because some people really need to build themselves up. So you start from drills, or maybe like 2 or 3 minute speeches, where they're just giving one argument on a topic, it's not a formal debate, and working your way up to a debate. Or some people can just immediately get their feet wet. They just do a debate round, no idea what's happening, but I'll do it. I'm more of the second than the first. And assessing what kind of person you are or what kind of students you have is really important in ensuring that they are doing something they are comfortable with and are more willing to do it as well. And the reason for that is you want to build muscle memory for the quick preparation, for the communication skills, for the rules of debating, because you will learn a lot about the rules of debating by violating them, by messing up. And you will get more comfortable in the high stress 15 minutes, like, oh my god, what do we say? We're up next. If you just go through it so many different times, at some point you'll just notice that you're speaking longer, you are learning the rules, but that comes from just doing it. And doing it in a way that you are motivated and not scared and stressed to do it. The next thing is that I think it's important to set goals centered around the rules of debating. So things like, I want to speak for 7 minutes. I want to have a clearly structured argument. I just want to fulfill the expectations of a prime minister or a whip speaker. And the reason for that is that I think a lot of people will try to either win or will try to have the most like highfalutin, intelligent argument that might not make sense to a lot of other people except the person saying it. I think a lot of these other goals are either more difficult to reach or are more zero sum, which is why I personally refrain from having decisions or results in training rounds for novices because they tend to be quite zero sum, right? Like some people will win, some people will lose. And some people might be more motivated when they win, some people will be less motivated when they lose. And therefore, centering it around the rules of debating, just wanting to speak longer, structure better, I think are much better and healthier and sustainable for students. Next is you want to train with other novices. Because you could possibly learn more from going against the top speaker, hearing their ideas, thinking they're so great and copying them. But it's quite demoralizing, both in terms of you will feel bad for losing, but also it's hard not to feel like you're left behind, or rather that you are behind, and that you have a lot to catch up on. I think I felt that a lot initially because I didn't start late, but I started late into my high school. Whereas a lot of my peers were around the same age, but were incredibly good at debating. And it was hard to feel like I have to catch up on all of that in such a short amount of time. But really, it's very possible. It's just not something you'll realize at the start. And training with other novices can help you build your own confidence and I guess share some of the struggles that you might have that other people around you might have as well. So your older debaters might not struggle at all with building a PM speech, but being able to talk about those things with your fellow novices I think can help. I understand that these are things that are restricted by the size of your society, for example, but being able to find people from other societies that are also novices, joining novice tournaments, or if you're lucky, people from your own society, can be very helpful. Next is you want to keep interested. So you want to do motions you find personally interesting or enjoyable. You want to spend time with people who you can learn from, but also like nice and fun to be around. Again, morale is very sensitive at this time. And I think debate can be fun, but also kind of boring. Like if you do five motions on a topic you don't really care much about, you might feel disinterested in debating. And part of it is just really doing things that you find fun. Topic areas you might find fun, speaker roles you might find fun. At this point, you want to ensure and preserve that interest more so than you would want to preserve like exposure to so many different things. Of course, that's a good thing, but in moderation and ensuring that you're not, again, outright focusing on just improvement at the compromise of interest and engagement. You also want to familiarize yourself with common motions. So you can look through hellomotions.com to see different motions, but I'd prefer for you to ask for classic debates from your coaches or older debaters. It's hard to tell what a classic debate is or a classic motion is if you're new, but your coaches or older debaters should probably know that. Reason being that these classic motions often are fairly easy to understand, not too complicated, but have a lot of room for complexity. But at the same time, they're often at the core of many other debates. So you find another debate that's about a different thing, but you can apply some of the arguments you've made in these classic motions into those new debates. You also want to try different things. You might not like some speaker roles, and it's just about like personal preference at the start. Like you might like speaking first because you want to have all the ideas said first, or you might take a little bit of additional time to think of things, so you might want to speak later on in the debate. So go through different speaker positions, teammates, sides of the house, and see what interests you most. Sometimes you just need a change of a teammate, a change of what position you like doing in order to have more fun. Last thing, and primarily for coaches, is that your feedback should be mostly confidence building and instructive. Confidence building, again, for morale, but instructive because I think there are times where you can tell someone what to improve on, but they don't really know how to do it if they haven't been debating for a long time. So if you tell them, here was the deficiency in your speech, they might not really know, how do I fix that? What should I do next? So for example, if you felt like they didn't know much about a topic, you can't just say, well, I feel like you didn't really explain this. You didn't know or prove this enough. You could instead point them to resources and say, it might be helpful if you share some of the ideas in this article that explains part of the argument you were already trying to make. So I think at the start, people need a lot of direction, and being able to point them towards these helpful resources, I think, is really crucial. Intermediate level. So this is likely where you're a couple points away from breaking or have done well in some tournaments, and you understand the game of debating and have been training for maybe a few months, a year, maybe a couple of years. And I think there are a few goals for you at this stage. Number one is, I think you should have the basic debate down for all motion types. For any motion that comes at you, I don't know if you're going to give the most amazing case, but you should at least be able to give an okay case. Next is you want to start to improve on specific skills. So you want to look at smaller chunks of speech, like argumentation, rebuttal, extension. Last thing is you want to start to build a strategic intuition. What should we do when placed in different scenarios? So some advice for intermediate improvement. The first is you just want to have a 101 of every debating theme. I think a lot of people just accept they're quote unquote not good at a certain motion theme. But the hard thing about that is that you're not going to dodge it. You can't veto in BP, and even when you can veto in Asians or 3v3, you can't veto the theme. They will largely be mostly the same theme. And so, especially at this stage where 1 or 2 points can make a break or lose you a break, you can't have a round where you're certainly going to lose. And so understanding basic finance, how social movements work, various political systems and their advantages or disadvantages, etc. Really, really important. Ensure that you have your bases covered. Next is you want to practice specific skills. I think drills are useful for this. I'd recommend them for improving on weaknesses, or if you're starting to specialize in a certain speaker role. So I think drills like, personally, I've had help with generating arguments and then having a very small amount of prep time for myself, like 30 seconds, and then trying to rebut those arguments after that 30 seconds, because you don't have much time when you hear an argument from the opposing team and then trying to come up with a rebuttal. Next is you want to start to incorporate strategy in your preparation. I think at the start, A lot of people are thinking, what are the arguments you can have? What are the rebuttals we can launch? You're looking at the two sides and thinking argument, rebuttal, argument, rebuttal. I think what helps is to prepare for scenarios. Like, if we're closing, opening takes this, and we have this left, how do we explain that the extension we have left is more important than what our opening has? I think you want to be able to incorporate more of a strategic sense. Or, we're opening. This motion is very thin, it doesn't have much extension material. How do we burn through all the possible material so that, worst case, we're third, we will beat our closing? I think it's also very helpful to practice with speakers you can learn from. And that could just be people who have a lot of experience, the pros from your uni, for example. Or it helps to practice with speakers that have vastly different areas of expertise or debate strengths. So I personally am not the most rhetorical speaker. I am more of a hardcore logic analysis kind of speaker. But debating with people who are very rhetorically strong has helped me improve at least on that sense and give it a bit more focus. Or just someone who might have a very different major from you and would know more about a specific topic, and you can learn from them so that in future tournaments where you aren't with them anymore, you can still incorporate some of the analysis that they shared or things that they explained in prep. It's also good to learn to diversify. I think a lot of people become comfortable with how they started out debating. Like, I know a lot of people, when asked, why do you do the speaker role? It's kind of just like, well, I've been doing that from the start, and I guess I just never really tried much else. But at the same time, I have judged or observed or debated against a lot of speakers who I could just tell that if they were in a different speaker role, they wouldn't even do poorly in the speaker role they're in. It's just that you could tell if they were in another one, they'd be far more optimized in terms of their skill set and talents. So it's not bad to stick to one thing at the end, but it's good to have known your other options first. I personally did a lot of first speaking in college, but that's mostly in the first half of my career. But then I realized I'm actually a much stronger deputy speaker than I am a prime minister LO. And being able to learn that, I think, has helped me a lot later on in my career. It's also helpful to watch videos and observe tournaments. And I recommend this at this stage because I think when you are a novice, it's very difficult to know what is a good debate, and you don't really know yet how to judge debates. And so you might just copy debates because they're on YouTube, not knowing the quality of the speaker, the mistakes they're making, the good things they're doing. But I think at the intermediate level, you've probably developed more of a sense of how to judge a debate, how to assess a debate. And I think here, it really helps to learn a lot from different speakers, both in terms of just speaking styles, speaking strengths, and strategies, but also, especially for motions you do not know much about, I think debates are a great way to be able to learn more about particular topics. Reason being that people are already condensing the information that they know into bite-sized understandable pieces rather than just a very long article that you might have difficulty getting to. Or they might point you to that information. They might share concepts that will get you to read up more. So I'd highly recommend watching videos and observing tournaments whenever possible. Feedback. So I think also at this stage, you're better able to process feedback. And I think you have to make the following assessments. The first is you have to ask yourself, is this feedback recurring? So is this something you've gotten consistently in training, in tournaments? If so, you have to actively incorporate that into your training or prep for the next few rounds. You have to make a mental note or even a physical note for yourself. In my freshman year of college, where I did my first national tournament, we had a list of just important things to do in a debate. And it sounded stupid, but we'd realize we would forget some pretty important things until at some point we had ticked everything on the list so that when we check it, we'd realize that we've got it down pat. And it was important to initially do that first to ensure that we were not missing out on important things. The next that you have to assess is the feedback because of knowledge. So for example, if a judge will tell you, you failed to prove this thing, you have to ask yourself, did I fail to prove this because it did not occur to me that that was important? I think that's a strategic mishap. And you have to check and go back to the first comment. Is this something that's been occurring? Am I missing out on proving important things? Am I just assuming they're true? Or maybe you knew you had to prove it, but you didn't know how to prove it. If so, I think you wouldn't take that so much as something you have to incorporate into training, but more so something you have to read up on more. Maybe you didn't have the knowledge to be able to prove that specific claim. And therefore, being able to assess is something, a strategic thing or a knowledge thing, I think is really important in assessing feedback. Last thing is this feedback one off? So I think you will make mistakes and you will lack knowledge, you will make strategic mishaps. But you have to ask yourself, was it just a bad round? Was it a bad day, a bad tournament? Is it something that if you were given the week after or the week before, you would not have done? Because I think the hard thing is, let's say you do a tournament with 8 or 9 rounds, you're gonna get so much feedback. And it's hard and it's overwhelming to fix every individual thing you could have possibly fixed. I think given that then, you have to ask yourself, is this something that I will learn from? Or is this something that I kind of have to just move on from? I'm a big basketball fan, so forgive the reference, but I think a lot of top tier basketball players, they tell themselves that they could understand why they're missing shots, but sometimes they just miss shots, and it's hard to explain why. But focusing and dwelling on why you missed that shot can sometimes make you miss future shots, you know? And that's because you get in on your own head, you try to problem solve when there might not even be a problem, you know already how to fix it, and you're still trying to convince yourself as to all the different ways you could possibly fix it, rather than just focusing on, like reset, go next, focus on the next thing. And sometimes that's the more important way to be able to improve. So feedback is useful, and I think you have to assess how it's useful. What is it doing for you? And how much can you learn from it, or how much should you just instead forget it? Obviously, judges will oftentimes give you very valuable feedback. It's now a matter of how well you assess it that will take you to the next step. Next is you should attend tournaments. So I think training is good for experiments where you don't have to face the consequences of losing if things go wrong. So maybe you're gonna try a new speaker role. Maybe you're gonna try a risky strategy and see how well it does. Or if you don't even care about tournaments that much, maybe you're preparing for a big tournament, you can experiment in smaller tournaments so that you're well prepared for the big tournament. But I think the benefit of tournaments is they expose you to a circuit that is outside of your own society. They often push you harder because you want to win and you will try harder. And I think sometimes training might be difficult. Obviously, you should try your hardest, but sometimes you just need that extra mental push of how do I do my very best possible in this tournament. And again, I think exposure to different circuits is really helpful. I in the online debating era, I did a lot of tournaments outside of my own circuit, and I learned a lot, not because other circuits are just better than mine, but more so because other circuits have very different strategies, priorities in terms of what debating should be and how it is, such that you learn a lot from them and you become a more balanced debater. And I think that helps a lot in ensuring that when you go to a major, you you can appeal to different circuits. Not so much appeal, but more so that you understand the strengths of various circuits and how to be able to respond to them, how to be able to incorporate them in your own debating style. The last thing, and more of a mental note, is that this is probably going to be the most volatile time in your career. You will break in some tournaments, you will not break in other tournaments. Some days you feel like you are improving, you're taking the next step, and you will be regressing. I think at the intermediate level, randomness will get you a lot. It could be a hard motion or a motion that's randomly good for you. It could be a judge that might not even be bad or good, just have different ways of seeing debating that benefits you or harms you. It could just be a bad matchup. Like a really good team takes a fourth that you didn't expect and they get into your room and then you lose your bubble room. All these different things. I think the important thing is to learn not to zero in and know that you can just have bad days. Know that some things are not indicative of your overall skill. And it's more important to look at overall trends, like a moving average of how well you do in debating, rather than I'm so good or I'm so bad or I suck. Things like that. Not helpful. Looking at bigger trends and bigger picture is a lot more helpful than individual tournaments. Alright, so at the advanced level, I think at this stage you can pretty comfortably break or even win many tournaments. And you can break in very difficult tournaments like majors, like worlds, very competitive IBs. And I think you can probably take some rounds of very good debaters and have probably like a very good understanding of the game of debating, as well as of the world and how to like talk about the world. And I think these are the goals that you have at this point. Number one is specializing in a speaker role to a very great degree. Number two is becoming very adaptable to rounds because it's easy to know what to do. It's hard to actually step up to the plate and do it. The third is having a high level understanding of many different topics. So, my first tip is just to obsess with the minor details. And also, know when those minor details make a difference. I don't think everything in your speech should be perfect, but you should do things that matter, that might not seem like they matter, very well. So, for example, there are some debates that everyone will just agree on a context, and then it's just let's out argue each other. There are some debates where everyone will disagree on the context, and you have to spend a lot of time explaining here's what the debate is, here's what the world is, and there are all the reasons why. And that might be even more important than the arguments because they are a prerequisite to all those arguments. And so knowing when these minor details matter a lot can help. So there, like context and setup. I think the first minute of a member speech, for example, matters so much because you can have the best extension in the world, but when a judge has to evaluate that compared to a lot of other really good extensions or cases, you need to find a way to sell it from the very beginning because I think that first minute is just a hook. Why are you going to listen to me? Why are you going to value this speech? And explaining that in the first minute, I think, is really important. Also, preemption. And I think preemption isn't just you find ways to be able to deal with opposing arguments. It's also about wasting time. And not wasting time of, more so wasting the strategic time that an opponent has. So, for example, if you preempt a lot of the strongest arguments from LO at PM, they will still probably say those arguments because they prepped about them. But what you're doing is you're forcing DLO to have to make the adjustments of how do we adapt these arguments. Sorry, very rainy outside. But how do we adapt these arguments to the now existing preemption from PM? Given that, then, you'd have to be able to ensure that these preemptions can make an LO a lot less compelling than they would have been had they not been preempted. You want to be very deliberate about these things in prep, and a good chunk of it is just knowing what the other side is likely to say and having foresight into the debate. You should be able to see from PM to op whip and understand, given these things, what is our strategy and our approach at OG, OO, CG, CO. You also want to prepare for situations because being adaptable isn't just quick thinking on your feet. A lot of it is just being familiar with the situation and knowing how to go about it. So it's not just that people are very smart and know exactly what to say at the right time, but that they've been there before, they've seen it before, and they know how to navigate it. And so you have to know what to do when maybe you're a whip and you have a very valuable but kind of thin extension at member. How do you sell what is not that much of an extension but you think is still very valuable extension as the most important thing? How do you OG when you have very confusing or messy motions? How do you clean that up, make it very clear? How do you respond to teams with a huge amount of matter? A lot of this, I think, is exposure. One thing that's really helped me is that I'm very lucky to have been in an institution with a lot of very good debaters. So, for example, I'd want the CG for people in my institution because their OG is very, very good. And a lot of the time, very difficult for me to extend and know how to extend. So you want to continuously expose yourself to these situations where you can in order to ensure that when you're actually put in that situation in a competitive environment, you know what to do. It's also very good to have a specific understanding of the world because at this level, a lot of debaters will know how things work, what they do, etc. And so the specifics will make a difference of what are the ways a multilateral organization votes? Is it by contribution? Is it by unanimity? Is it by majority? All those things. Or how is the economy of a country structured? Maybe they are authoritarian, but they have ties to X country, or they export this product, and that's important in considering why they're likely to change their mind on something. Or where does an actor get their funding? How do they continue to fund the actions that they're doing? A big challenge here is also communicating this to the average person in a way that's concise and fits your material. And so you don't just want to know a lot. I think at the high level, you kind of get lost in the sauce, you know? Like you just think that everyone will have this high level understanding of all concepts, when really that might begin to be interventive for a judge to assume that, well, I should know all this very complicated material because everyone here is smart and I am smart. Whereas judges should really just be thinking, would the average person get what this person is saying? And you have to always ensure you're catering to that. And good judges always do that. It also helps here, I think, to have arguments or rebuttals that are outside of the current debate meta or the common arguments that pop up. I think when I do like 2 or 3 months of just continuous tournaments in a circuit, which is sad, but I've done it, you get to see a lot of the similarities in thoughts and arguments because a lot of the same people are hitting each other in tournaments. I think it helps to understand or get sources of information even that are outside what is commonly known because you, one, learn how to rebut these things, two, are less likely to be predictable, but three, because things like extension are completely based on novelty, it helps to have very unique frames and knowing how you could possibly work around the conventions of a circuit or in the arguments. I also think working with your partner becomes so much more important here. That's the next video, but a lot of high level debating can come down to 1 or 2 minutes of prep where something was considered. So having very efficient prep, making game plans, coordinating well with your partner can make like a mountain of difference. Last thing is that I think in terms of like a mental like stage, I think expectations become a lot bigger and more frightening here. Like, I think at this stage, losing sucks more than winning feels good. And given that, you want to find ways, I guess, to cope when bad things happen, especially because I think tilt is very possible, or losing one leads to another loss, to another loss, to another loss. So you have to know how to deal with losing and not think of it as an indictment on your intelligence or your character, but something that even the top level rooms have as an inevitable outcome, and know how to adjust, how to get better, and how to address them. Because I think that frustration with losing can sometimes cloud your judgment in terms of how do we assess things, how do we get better, how do we deal with it, especially when you feel like that losing might be unwarranted. Maybe it is, but it's inevitable in debating where you'll get imbalanced motions, where you'll get a judge you're not fond of, and learning a lot of it is knowing how to be in a tough spot and getting out of it, rather than thinking the world has cheated you of a spot, when a lot of the time it probably hasn't even. And developing personal methods to get back on track after tough rounds of losses, I think, really, really important. So that's all. I hope this like collection of insights was useful, and would love insight from other people as well as to how to improve in debating. Hopefully, I'll be posting a lot more in the next few days. I already have the videos. Thank you so much. That's all.